Hi, this is Dr. Cora Statcom on your side here. I've just done a little bit of research on the Irish Chief Justice, who I don't know at all, but his name apparently is Justice Donald O'Donnell, and he was appointed from the bar directly to the Supreme Court. So, they call it the frog leap or the leapfrog, whatever you call that. So, he didn't go through the usual route. So, let's see what is known about him on the record. So, we need to be very careful not to to align or misalign or not. I want to check everything before I, but just check some of the records here to see could there be a potential conflict of interest here. But certainly an exceptionally talented person, in constitutional law, unquestionably, but has a long association with representing the state. So, just to correct the record, what's known about him, Chief Justice Donald O'Donnell is widely regarded as one of Ireland's foremost experts in constitutional law. This is supported by his career history, his legal practice, and his judicial record. Now, he's not long in the Supreme Court, but because we'll see why he's considered a constitutional law expert. Decades of constitutional practice in the bar. Before joining the Supreme Court, he was one of the most sought after senior counsel in the state for constitutional cases. He appeared for both the state and private parties in many major constitutional channels. So he had significant, he would have significantly experience in representing the state, which is the government. So, he's well known to government parties. So, directly appointed to the Supreme Court, which is very rare in Ireland. It was 2010, actually, he was appointed directly from practice to the Supreme Court, not via the High Court, a sign of exceptional constitutional expertise and national reputation. And again, what it says here, a huge amount of representation on behalf of the state. So, made an impression on, the people that were appointing people to the state. And I would say the appointment was, it was on merit, but also the fact that he had done a great job for the state. So, is that a conflict of interest potentially? That's a question. I can't answer that. So, but major constitutional judgments, like his record, his authors contribute to numerous significant Supreme Court decisions, especially on constitutional interpretation, separation of powers. That's where he's needed really here. Both of those, constitution and separation of powers, rights, jurisprudence, proportionality, and judicial review. His judgments are known for being highly analytic and highly reasoning. Now, I'd be known for both of those, for being highly analytic. He was a member of the Law Reform Commission. Now, 2005-2012, he contributed to reform and analysis of public law, further consolidating standing constitutional theory. Now, I would say in the time that I have been examining law in Ireland, I have made a more significant international contribution, to policy than he has. In fairness, I think because, people from the inside are kind of, they're constrained by their peers and they can't really, go beyond the borders of what might be acceptable to their peers. I'm not saying that, that does happen. I'm not saying he that he hasn't got the vision that he should have, but perhaps he's constrained by his discipline and his position that he can't. So I'm offering, I think, a much better solution in terms of my advocacy for trauma-based arbitration first situation here. And I'd like him, if he was listening to this, which he probably listened, to take I'm an expert now in terms of all of this, and I've studied it for years, and I also have the psychological side, the human side. You see, a lot of these people have no they have no training or expertise or scholarship in psychology, and that's critical. I think that's a real missing. That trauma, the emotional human side of the human condition is missing from our public law, our justice system in a huge way. So, international constitutional expert, yes, he has represented on, of course, like the European Court of Human Rights. Now, would that be, as a defendant, if he's represented Ireland, and the European Courts of Justice, often in cases involving constitutional rights-based issues, would that be defending Ireland against people who are taking cases of abuse of human rights of Ireland. I mean, that would be an interesting one to investigate, that one. But his peers consistently describe him as an intellectual heavyweight, something I am myself. In constitutional law, legal scholars, senior judges in the Irish media repeatedly identify him as one of the leading constitutional thinkers. So, like, he'd be a very good match for me. But I would say in the long run, I'd say, given 15 years' time, I would say I'd have a bigger reputation worldwide than he'd have. I already have it, really, if you look at my, that's in a very short time. So I mean, I'm not bringing him down or anything. I'm just saying, like, that's where he is, and he's obviously very talented, Now, one thing that I did read about him, I think, was that he's inclined to want, before he makes a decision, he likes the government to kind of tidy up its act. So, perhaps that's the sort of judge we would need, like, for example, with the protective disclosures and things like that. I would say that rather than have, the Supreme Court dictate what should be done, that the government should get its act together first and, change the law before he rubber stamps the final Supreme Court. But if the government don't do what they should do, then he should, like what they did in the Supreme Court in Denmark. They had to dictate what the government had to do, because the government there didn't, recognise parental alienation. It was the Supreme Court that forced the change in the policy of the government. It didn't come the other way around. So sometimes you have to do so. Like, there's the hesitancy there in his career, that he's inclined to, we will say, do the opposite to what Denmark did there. If you just kind of examine it now, that's a very superficial examination of his record and the fact that he has represented the state. Now, whether he has in any way been implicated with the decisions of... Now, if you were to project his thinking that or his view that governments should sort things out, if you look at the judgment of Cregan was saying it's a political matter. If that came from Justice O'Donnell, that might have been acceptable, perhaps in a different situation, but certainly it wasn't acceptable in a government, for a government, an election like this. There's no way it was acceptable if it came from him, that it should be the political, establishment should change the law. Or no, in this case, that wouldn't be quite, you couldn't really translate that kind of judgment at the Supreme Court level. That would be okay in a lot of situations, but not in this one, in my opinion. So I'm not saying he was instrumental in any way, but if there was any kind of influence by him based on his previous judgments, where he likes the governments to kind of clean up their act and get their law or whatever it is tidied up before he comes along and does his judgment, that I think it would be at least give the government a chance to do the right thing, and I would agree with that, but not in this case. No. So, but I don't know whether he was involved in that. But there is this political, it's a political issue. And then if he's saying, well, in certain judgments that they have to tidy things, I don't think there was time here. And I think, that hesitancy, if it is in his judgments or his carefulness not to give the government, I don't think it was appropriate here. So it was the wrong... it was completely wrong if he was involved, but I'm not saying he is or he isn't, but I'm just looking at one angle which could perhaps implicate him. The fact that he has a long history of representing the state, and secondly that he allows the state or the government to correct or if there's constitutions, and that he has represented Ireland in the European, so he has defended Ireland in the in human rights issues. Again, that would mean there's a potential conflict of interest there with the Chief Justice. But I can't be for sure. Only that I think that obviously he couldn't be happy with the current situation. He couldn't be happy with it. No. So I think my vision is better than his. Honestly, it is. It's more sensible and more practical. But then he'd be constrained by his own profession who he mightn't be very popular for coming out what I'm coming out with, that we need arbitration first, and trauma informed, and we need humanity back in law rather than this coldness. Going to courts and the judges are by and large very cold, the vast majority real cold, detached, and this is neutrality. No, this is lacking in humanity, and there's so many, in every dispute there's emotional elements to it, almost even in commercial litigation, every dispute. So we're going to bring the humanity back into law. So I'm being very visionary here in terms of what I'm saying, and I'm being sensible and practical as well. I mean, I'm talking common sense, and I'm not a snob, and I don't look down on people, and I know I'm extremely bright, and I have to start to keep it in now because it's proven by data analytics. So no one could push me down anymore. I'd push my data analytics in their face, and they've been tearing me down for years, mocking me, and the Gardaí are the worst ever for knocking me at every turn, and the disrespect from our Garda Síochána is absolutely shocking. I'm sure the former commissioner would be appalled at the level of disrespect that I have been subjected to by Garda Síochána. Now, were they behind any of this? I mean, could they have, I was very disrespectfully treated by somebody, a fairly senior detective in the Bridewell at one stage. I won't say what he did, but what I thought he did, which was really reprehensible. And he was smart, a very smart detective, and the senior person there